Welcome back. A lot of things to go over today. We'll talk about some of the offensive and defensive expectations for the 2016 season. Player news, Bennett, Dobson, some injury updates. I'll go over again, kind of give you a brief rundown of why I'm doing this and kind of my goal with the whole podcast, and Jacoby Brissett and him finally signing his contract. That took a little bit longer than most of the other draft picks this season. So, for the longest time, back in the heyday, in the early 2000s, the defense was a strong point, and the defense was pretty much the reason New England got to those Super Bowls. And for quite a while, it was the New England Patriots defense carrying the offense. And for the last 7 seasons, it's been quite the opposite. You can obviously take the 2014 defense out of that, but up until about the 2014 season, in between 2008 and 2014, was pretty much the offense doing the heavy lifting and making up for the holes in the defense. You remember the 2011 season when New England went to the Super Bowl. It was the worst-ranked defense of all time to ever reach the Super Bowl, and that was because Tom Brady, Aaron Hernandez, Gronkowski, Welker, the offensive line, all those guys were doing the heavy lifting and making up for the massive holes in the secondary and the pass rush. It just wasn't a good. There just was no good defenses from 2008 to 2013. It was real ugly. And you look at now, it's last season. The reason for the struggles, I think, towards the end of the season was the offense. You look at the Philadelphia game. The amount of points given up they gave up 35 points. Hardly any of those were from the defensive side of the ball. A lot of turnovers, a lot of misplays by the offense led to easy points for the Eagles. And then you look at the playoffs. AFC Championship game, Patriots score 18 points. They held Denver to 20. The divisional round, they held the Chiefs to 20 points. This is a real stout defense that was banged up with injuries all season last year. And I think this season we remain relatively healthy, and this New England Patriots team is the best team in the NFL. With guys like Collins, Hightower. You've got the secondary with McCourty, Chung. It's a real good defense. On the D-line, you've got solid players. This defense might be better than the 2014 defense, and with the addition of Martellus Bennett, guys like Edelman coming back healthy, Amendola, Gronkowski, this might be a better offense than the 2011 offense. There's a lot of weapons, and the great thing about getting a guy like Martellus Bennett is Gronkowski, God forbid he goes down with an injury, it doesn't take away from the ability to get open. You remember last year when he was hurt, or when Edelman got hurt, they didn't quite have the depth they needed to recover from big injuries. Edelman left, it made it real hard for Amendola to get open. Gronk left, it made it real hard for Edelman to get open. Sorry, Amendola. Edelman was hurt at the time. It was a real cycle of injuries, and it was with the addition of Martellus Bennett. Say a guy like Gronkowski gets hurt, Bennett still, all the attention would go to him, or all the attention would go to Edelman, and those guys would balance it out, and one of those guys would still be able to get open, or a guy like Bennett gets hurt, and you've still got Gronk and Edelman, that duo, and Amendola, and Chris Hogan. There's so many weapons this year, they can almost afford an injury. You got Lewis and Blunt in the backfield. If this team stays relatively healthy, there's too many weapons. It's the 2011 offense on steroids. Chris Hogan may not pan out to be anything, but we know what Bennett is. We know what Gronk is. We know what Edelman and Amendola are. This team is built for success, and if they can manage somehow to fix that O-line, and when you get Nate Solder back healthy, and you figure out what's going on at center, if this offensive line can stay together and play well as a unit, I don't see how we don't win 13, 12, 13, or 14 games this season. Head and shoulders, I think this team is better than any in the AFC. The Pittsburgh Steelers might be second. It's not Denver anymore. Denver doesn't have a quarterback. And as much as we want to say Peyton Manning was a below average quarterback last year, which I think he was, he still has that mind for the game. So he still knew what he was doing. He could still direct the offense and see what the defenses were doing. A guy like Mark Sanchez, I don't think he's going to be as good as a banged up Peyton Manning last year, because Peyton Manning's football IQ trumps his abilities last season, and that saved them in a lot of situations. His football IQ saved them, even though he didn't have the physical ability to do everything that he wanted to. Mark Sanchez doesn't have that football IQ. There's a lot of guys in the league who aren't as good full strength as a banged up Peyton Manning last year. We want to make fun of his weak arm, but he's still got that mind for the football game, for the game of football. So this year, with the defense and the offense, I don't think last year there was, from week 6 on, there was a big name who got hurt every week. I don't think that happens again this year. Last year was a crazy year when it comes to injuries, and a lot of guys are on the mend, and a lot of guys are getting healthy this season. And I think we're going to see, hopefully, a healthier Patriots team. And with that is going to come less struggles, because through the first 10 weeks of the season last year, although there was a lot of injuries, nearly unstoppable. There was a blip in the radar in week 10 against the Giants where we nearly lost. But it was nearly unstoppable through the first 10 weeks of the season. After that, you could see the injuries really taking an effect. You lose 4 out of the next 6 games. And then you lose the last 2 games of the season. It was a real struggle last year. The last 6 games of the season, 7 games of the season was not typical Patriots football. They usually struggle or come off to a bit of a slow start and then finish strong. If you look at Tom Brady's career record through December and January, it's off the charts. Rarely do they lose in December, and if they do, it's 1 game. Rarely do they lose 4 of the last 6 games of the season. That's just not Patriots football. And the ability to flip it around, come back, and win in the divisional round, you thought maybe they had a chance going into Denver, but Denver's pass rush, because of the offensive line injuries, just wasn't. The offensive line couldn't handle what Denver had on defense. So if they stay healthy, if everyone works together as a unit this season, I don't see why the Patriots can't make it back to the AFC Championship game and back to the Super Bowl, because I don't think, in my opinion, there's anyone who can hold a candle to what they can do this season. Martellus Bennett and Aaron Dobson both at practice this week, playing well. I have a quote from a source talking about Dobson's day at practice on the 11th, it might be. He said he caught the ball extremely well throughout the 2-hour session, including a number of contested catches down the field, as he put together maybe his most impressive practice during his time in New England. It's just practice. It's real early, but it's a sign. Dobson battled a lot of injuries last season. He's a guy who has had trouble breaking out because of injuries and because of other receivers. He hasn't really had a chance, per se, but he'd be a nice guy. If you can get him 600, 700 yards this season, 800 yards, that's a real good number for him. You mix him in with Hogan, Amendola, and Edelman, that's a real good option for New England if they can get Dobson going. If he can stay healthy and he can be that deep threat. He's a big guy. He's a nice target. If he can be that downfield threat, he could have a real nice season. He needs to pan out. He needs to play well. He needs to stay healthy. And his problems, he's had some problems with dropping the football. That's got to get fixed. Him and LaFell need to figure that out. But it's good news. It's a positive to see this. His most impressive time in New England. He's been there for, I think this is his 4th season. It's good to see that he's making progress. He's healthy and he's playing well. Bennett, it was a funny quote from Bennett. He said, "I don't mind being the Robin to Gronk's Batman," and that's right there is a sign of, he knows his role. He knows Gronk's the number 1 target in New England. He knows that he's playing second fiddle, but that's a sign of a good teammate. He can, He knows he's the second tight end. He knows he's the second option. But at the same time, he knows he's a superstar. He knows what kind of player he is, and he's going to have a big effect on the season. It's not going to be He's not going to kind of fizzle away like the last couple tight ends that have been brought in New England. Scott Chandler, and I'm drawing a blank on the guy in 2014 from Tampa Bay. But the start of the season, Scott Chandler, and I don't know why I'm drawing a blank. 2014. Who? Anyways, the tight end. The last 2 years they brought in a second tight end to kind of fill that being hopeful that he would fill that Aaron Hernandez type role. But Scott Chandler and the other dude, they just kind of fizzled away towards the end of the season. They were a bigger impact in the beginning of the year, and I don't know if defenses figured it out or if Belichick just took them out of the game plan. But towards the end of the seasons, it was just Gronk. It was kind of a one tight end offense, and there's no way Bennett turns out to be like this because Bennett's a superstar. He's a great option. In the last couple years in Chicago, he's almost been the third option because of Brandon Marshall and Alshon Jeffrey. But again, all three of those guys were kind of like number one options. But this year, I think that we're gonna see a lot of two tight end sets. There's gonna be a lot of action for the both of them, and he's gonna have a good season. I'm predicting him and Gronk to both go over 1,000 yards if they can both stay healthy. That is. I don't think, how are you going to cover both those guys when you're covering Edelman and Amendola at the same time? How's that going to work? One of those guys is going to be open on every single play. It's going to be a scary offense this year. I'm real excited for it. Gronk and Dion Lewis back at practice. It's not surprising. Gronk's injuries weren't anything too serious. But Lewis, there was talk about Dion Lewis being on the physically unable to perform list to start the season. So this is huge news because he's going to be ready for camp. He's coming back from that torn ACL. This is only 7 months removed from it, I believe. So that's big news. Dion Lewis is one of the more dynamic players on the team. He's got the ability to... There's some crazy stuff he did last season. The touchdown he had against the Cowboys, the one spin move, I'm getting real specific here, but the one spin move he had against the Dolphins in I think week 8, maybe. I think it was week 8. Week 8. The Patriots played the Dolphins. He had one great. He's one of the most agile guys in the league. He's Danny Woodhead, Shane Vereen on crack. He's one of the most, if not the most dynamic player in the league, and he's still young. He's got a long career ahead of him. ACL surgeries aren't as big of a deal, I don't think, as they used to be. I said this last week, but there's no worry of him coming back and being healthy eventually. It was just a matter of when. But to see him back out on the field, he said he's getting stronger every day. That's a good sign. Him being back this early is a good sign because we're still a ways away from the season. He still has time to rehab it. And, barring there's no re-aggravation of the injury, he should be fine come week 1. Jacoby Brissett, Patriots 91st overall draft pick, signed a 4-year deal today. I believe it was a max deal. It's kind of an interesting draft pick. You have Brady under contract for the next 4 seasons, I believe. It might be 3. I believe it's 4. And you've got Jimmy Garoppolo. So it's an interesting pick. They seem to draft quarterbacks often. Matt Castle, Jimmy Garoppolo. I believe Brian Hoyer was a draft pick. Now Jacoby Brissett, sorry. It's probably something that won't pan out. I don't see him ever starting for New England. I don't see Jimmy Garoppolo starting for New England. Is Garoppolo going to wait till his 6th or 7th season before he starts a game? I mean, trade bait, potentially, but I don't see Garoppolo starting a game for New England. Potentially, Jacoby Brissett is in his 5th season and he gets to start for New England, but that's barring that Brady doesn't keep playing. We don't know when he's going to stop playing. He's shown 0 signs of slowing down. So it's he's an athlete. He's a big dude. He's a strong guy. He's smart. From what I've read and from the football analysts that I've listened to, he's a smart quarterback. Not a lot of turnovers, and he's a big-bodied guy, kind of like a Roethlisberger. He seems like a guy who could play in the cold. He's an interesting pick. To not have a first-round pick like New England did this season, and then take him in the 3rd round with their 2nd pick of the draft, interesting, because there's different areas where we struggle. wide receiver being one of them, a big-bodied wide receiver, offensive line. So it was an interesting pick. I don't think Belichick has a great drafting record when it comes to the offensive side of the football. I think it's been much better on the defensive side of the football in the last 6 or 7 seasons. With guys like Hightower, Collins, Jones. So we'll see what happens down the road with Brissett, but I don't know. It's interesting for me because I don't think that he'll ever play, given the contract situation with Brady and how Brady's playing. But so, anyways, that'll wrap up another week of news. And what I'm going to do is this podcast is set up so it's going to be kind of a once a week thing. And my goal with it, what I want to do, and I said last week that it was really for me, but what I want to do with it is I want to bring a week's worth of news and give it to you guys in a 15 to 20 minute segment. Because if you're going to keep up with all this stuff, it's going to take, daily looking into. People don't have, maybe people don't have enough time to do this research. So the goal with this is just to kind of bring a week's worth of news and give it to you in a 15 to 20 minute block. Maybe it stretches 30 minutes, maybe it stretches to an hour, but it's something right now that I want to keep short and sweet and get a lot of information out there in a relatively short amount of time. I've been a big Patriots fan since I can remember, but I've been a diehard fan. I'm only 22, so I've been a diehard fan since I was, maybe the last 7 seasons, I'd say. I've always been a fan of the Patriots, and it's more than likely because they were so good when I was really young. But I don't think I've missed a game since like 2010. I watch every game. I'm so invested in it, and I've been following it religiously for so long that I think my opinions and my passion for this team will come through in this show, and I think that the opinions that I have are, I'd like to think they're fairly educated because I keep up with it so often, and I can remember, going back 5 or 6, 7 years, I can remember a lot of information, and I remember players who have come through the system, and players who haven't worked out and who hasn't worked out, and draft picks. Like I was mentioning, I don't think offensively we've had the best draft record. You can bring in Gronk and Hernandez, but there's a lot of offensive wide receivers who just haven't panned out. And on the defensive side of the ball, like I said, I think we've been better in the last 5 seasons with guys like Collins, Jones, Hightower, McCourty, a lot of guys. Chung, although I believe he was a draft pick, although he went away to Philly, then came back. But that's the goal. 15 to 20 minute time slots, bring you guys a lot of information in a really short amount of time so that you don't have to do all this research. You don't have to read news articles. You don't have to go on their website every day. So it's just a way for you guys to get all this information in a relatively short amount of time. So if you enjoyed this, hit that like button, subscribe, and we'll see you next week.